Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome back to our good friend Hazel Meredith.
Hey,
How are you
Tom.
doing today, Hazel?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. I'm glad to be back with you guys.
Hazel, what are you sharing with the DC community today?
Today, we're going to take some photos and we're going to give them a vintage kind of a look, a little bit of grunge, but kind of make them look like older photos.
Incredible. Well, I have always been a massive sucker for like vintage texture heavy work. It's my jam. I love it, happy to admit
Me
that.
too.
And I guess the hordes of people that we have with us today, all of you love it as well. So, buckle in. I think this is going to be an incredible session.
So, what I'm going to do is utilize some of these products, as we said, from these three sets that I selected, and I'm going to add a bunch of textures and different things to the images. I love to work with more than one texture on a photo, so I'm going to show you how to do this with multiple things and then how to go back and tweak them and change them and all that kind of good stuff. So I'm going to get started. All of the photos I'm using today are ones that I've already edited, the basic photos, so we're going to just get into the creative side of it. Um, this was a shot here in Tennessee that I took a couple years ago. I did go in and where this antiques and things is up here, I added that from another shot I had from Arizona because there was no sign on this building and I thought it needed one.
So I
So
kind of joke, Hazel, that my car is a little bit old and rusty, but I think this one takes it to a whole new level.
yeah, definitely. This one sure has not moved in a long time. This is a big antiques complex down there, and they do actually a couple times a year vintage, they call them Dixie Gas car shows where people sell car related parts and signs and all kinds of cool stuff. So it's a neat place to visit. So with this, I'm going to start by bringing in a texture. And I work with two monitors. So because I set things up for my webinars ahead of time, I drag in my textures from my other screen. But I'll also show you how to do it if you're just opening a screen and opening up some textures. So I'm going to start by dragging them in and then we'll show you the other method as well. The reason I like to drag them in is because it automatically adds them as a separate layer. It just saves me some steps, and it's easy to look at the other screen while I'm teaching. So I'm just going to stretch this texture out to cover my image, hit the check mark or the enter button to accept that. And then the working with textures is all about blending modes and opacities. So for this one, I actually wanted more of the color than I did the actual texture. So I don't often use this blending mode, but today we're going to use the one called color. And you can see it's really just applied the color from that image to my photo. And
It's
I'm
like
going to
a
leave
real
this
sepia look,
opacity.
right?
Yeah, I was kind of going for that vintagey look. And then I'm
Hmm.
going to bring in one more texture with a little bit lighter brownish tone. And this is a great way to, people always ask me, well, how do you know what texture to use on a photo? And you do get used to it the more you do it, but it's still a lot of trial and error. And you can also use the textures in this way to change the color of the images as well as adding the actual texture. So you're going to see that kind of happen more as we go along here. And I'm going to lower this opacity to about 60% to let some of the other textures show through because this one was really bright. And then I'm going to bring in one more. And like I said, I like to work with multiples. So you'll routinely see me add 3 to 5 or sometimes more
I'm
textures and
exactly the
brushes and
same. I love
yeah,
texture
I
stacking.
love to get that blend of the different products and just the way they all interact together. And this one I'm going to change to multiply, and that's going to darken the effect. And then we'll bring back that opacity a little bit to about here. So now this could be considered done, but I always like to go, well, what else can I do to an image? So we're going to do a couple of brushes on here to add some more looks to this. So I'm going to add a blank layer. I'm just going to click this plus sign down at the bottom of my layers palette. And we're going to go over to our brush tool. And there's two sets of brushes that are in these sets of products that you have here. One is the scripted ones, and the next set is these edges. So we're going to be using both today. I'm going to start with scripted number 12. I love adding writing to old things. I don't know, I like the look I get. So I'm going to make this brush a little bit bigger. I'm going to make it 2800 pixels, and I'm using my bracket keys to make the brush bigger. Those are the square brackets to the right of the letter P on your keyboard. The left one makes it smaller, the right one makes it bigger. I'm going to change the color of my text. So before I stamp it, I'm going to click my foreground color picker. And because I've done this before, I wrote down the number I wanted. So I'm going to type this in. Usually you would just, select something, and I wanted to go with the brown tones. So I just clicked around until I found something I liked, but so I could replicate it, I wrote it down. And with that, I'm also going to angle this slightly. So you can go into your brush panel to do that and use the angles here. The other way to visually see it, excuse me, is to use the arrow keys on your keyboard. So if you use the left arrow key, you can see in this little box up here the degrees changing. I'm going to go to 12 degrees and just angle that a little bit. And then I'm going to stamp it up here in the upper left. And then I don't really want it on the building, so I'm going to add a layer mask and then switch to just a round brush. And I can make that one much smaller now. And just with my foreground color of black, just brush that off of our building and maybe off the trucks there. I just kind of want it in that sky area. And then I'm going to add another blank layer. And we're going to use, in the same group, brush number 3, which is up here. And I'm going to make this one 2100 pixels. I'm going to make my color a different shade of brown, 120 C06. So we're going with the real dark brown for this one. And I'm also going to angle this a bit to 17 degrees. And then I'm going to stamp this one in the lower right, kind of like that. Oops, we don't need that. And it's real subtle, but you can see a little bit of that writing down there. And then I'm going to add one more blank layer. And we're going to switch to the other set of brushes. And I'm going to use this Distressed Edges one down here. And I'm going to add a little bit of a border to the image. I'm going to stick with that same color. So I'm going to make my brush the size of my image. And I'm going to stamp it one time. And oh, that's why those came out. I forgot to change the opacity of my brush. See, I wasn't paying attention because usually the others look darker, but that's okay because we're going to add something else. So I'm going to restamp this one just so that it's a little bit darker. There we go. And then I'm going to, again, rotate my brush, and I can use the menu or just go ahead and do it here. I'm going to do 90 degrees, make it the size of the top of my image, stamp once. And these 4 strokes I'm going to do on one layer because then I'm going to change the opacity. Let's go this direction. So I'm going to just kind of go around the 4 sides of the image here. And you're an 80, I'll make it smaller again to this side. And we'll stamp there. And then one more rotation. Back to 90 degrees. And we'll stamp that here. And then we can lower the opacity of that layer a little bit, just to give us a little bit of a border around that one. And there you have it. That's our first project.
I really love this. I think it's this kind of subtle but grungy vignette that you
Yeah.
have going on, and the sky with the subtle lettering over it is beautiful.
Yeah, and if the border, if you think it's a little too heavy, you can even pull back a little bit more on that to just give it a real subtle kind of a look, in the corners especially. You don't see it as much on the grass, but that's okay. It's still there and keeps it all, balanced. But I like that one as a sepia.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm going to close that one and open up our next image. And this is an old mill. Um, my husband got talking to this person online. This one's probably about 45 minutes from where we live. And a gentleman just bought this building and the property because they want to build a house on it. And unfortunately, they don't think they're going to be able to salvage this mill because inside it, this whole side is pretty deteriorated. But we did get to go inside and we've taken pictures there a couple times. So it's a really interesting place.
Speaking of interesting, I love this comment
Hmm.
from Cheryl, who
Hmm.
says, "Fun. I restore old photos. I never thought about doing the reverse," which is a really
Ah,
interesting way of looking at it, right?
yeah,
We're kind of
definitely. Yeah,
unrestoring
that's true.
photos, but yeah, we're intentionally scuffing them up and making them beautiful and vintage.
Exactly. That is a good point. I never thought of it that way. I know people do try and, scan in old photos and, take out the creases and things, and here we're trying to add them. So, good point. So, to open a texture, if you're not working with a second monitor, you would just go to File, Open, just like you would with your original image. And I happen to already be on the folder, and then you would just click the texture you want to open. Except that now it opens it as a separate image. So you have two images. So by using our move tool, we can, and I know there's a couple ways of doing this. The way I typically do it is to separate the two tabs and then just click in the texture and drag your mouse over your image. And then you can close this file and then you'll just place this over your image. So it's just a couple of extra clicks to do it that way, but it can be done for sure. And then this one I'm going to change to darken and lower my opacity to about 60% around there. Add just a little bit more color to it, kind of darken it a little bit. Then I'm going to bring in one of these grunge textures. Now, when you have one like this that is mostly black, what we're looking for is to utilize the lighter areas on our image. And the way we can do that is by using a blending mode of screen. And that will drop out the black and just leave the lighter colors. And conversely, if you have white in an image and you use multiply, it will get rid of the white. So that's that one. And then I'm going to bring in a border. And this is from the Paper Designer set. And this one has already got a transparent center, so we don't have to worry about getting rid of any of the center colors. And this one, I'm going to leave my blending mode and opacity at 100%, but I want to change this border to white to give it a white frame like an old photo. So the way we'll do that is I'm going to set my foreground color. D will set it back to your black and white, and then the letter X will flip these on any keyboard. And then I'm going to fill the pixels that already hold color. I don't want to fill the whole layer because I want the transparent to stay transparent. So normally I would do an Alt backspace. On a Mac, it's an Option Delete, would fill the whole layer. But if you hold the Shift key and do your Alt backspace, it will only put the color on the pixels that already hold color. It's a great shortcut I use all the time. And then we're going to bring in one more texture. And this is one of the shabby textures. And this has some kind of writing and stuff around the edges as well. This one I'm going to change to multiply and bring this back about 60%. And then I wanted to keep my white border, so I'm going to grab this layer and drag it below my border. And then I did change the opacity I went back to this one, to the border, and I just changed that a little bit. I brought it back just a hair, just to let a little bit of the color kind of show through so it wasn't such a bright white. And there you have it. You can always go back and modify, which I'm going to do on a couple of these. And that's our second project. So it definitely now has that vintage photo type of a look as opposed to our original.
That border is stunning as well.
I
I
love these.
absolutely
It's
love
a
that.
great collection of like hand painted, very rough edge borders. And I thought this one really gave it that kind of almost like a Polaroid photo type of look.
Hmm. Yeah,
So I really like
beautiful.
that one. Thank
And
you.
remember, if you're curious about the resources that Hazel's using, it is the green button just below this live
There you
stream.
go. Alrighty. So next up, I'm going to do something a little different. Got this old remnants of an old wagon. And I love the way this wheel was just kind of had the spokes and the metals pulled apart. And I shot it this way. It was in the spring and we had some of these pretty little yellow flowers in here. So again, we're going to use a few things on this one. This first one I brought in, I selected because it did have the green tones. And I decided that would work well with this image. Again, lots of trial and error when you're starting to work with textures. Just you can't break anything. Usually, when I'm starting on an image, I'll bring in like 5 or 6 textures and turn the layers on and off and try different blending modes to kind of see how they look and if I think it's going to be a candidate or not. So we're going to do multiply and then bring this one back. And I also like that one because it had a nice dark, edge to it, because I really wanted to focus the viewer's eye on that wheel. And then we're going to bring in this kind of grungy one. And then I decided on this one that I wanted to, because I have, let's hide it for a second, because I have stuff going on up here in the upper right, and a lot of this has texture over here, I'm going to flip it horizontally. So I'm going to go into Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. So that now there's more of the texture on that side and less over here where the wheel actually is. And sometimes I decide that after I've tried the blending modes, just so that way you can see what you want to do here. So we're going to change this one to multiply, and that's going to get rid of that white part and just leave the darker areas. And then I brought it back just a little bit. And next I'm going to do another border. And again, this one I want to darken my edges. So because I didn't really want to change the blending mode, another way to get rid of the white center is if you just grab your magic wand tool, and because it's a solid white, just click in here and you can see the marching ants kind of going along the edge there, and then just hit your delete or your backspace key and Control D will deselect. So now you just have the darker edge. And I'm going to also change the color of this a bit to D7 F491, kind of a greenish color. And oops, no, I don't want to change this one. That was the other one. Sorry, got ahead of myself here. Move the center. I do want to change the color. I take that back. I skipped a step, but that's okay. We can go back and add that one in. So I am going to use this color, and I'm going to do my Shift Alt backspace. And then I'm going to lower the opacity way down to about 25%.
It's great to see everyone enjoying this session so much, by the way.
Thank
Beth
you.
says, I am just in awe, which is pretty cool.
So I did want to add another one of those script brushes in here. So I'm going to do it under my border. So if I select this layer and click my new layer, it will add above the active layer. And then we're going to go to our brush and go back to the text brushes. And I want number 22. And I make this one really big, 4,300 pixels. On a Windows CC, you can go up to 5,000 pixels as the size of your brush. If you're using Photoshop Elements, it's 2,500. But once you stamp the brush, you can always do a Control T and stretch it further. So you're not limited, even though the sizes are technically limited. I'm going to change my angle just a little bit. And I'm going to make my brush white. So let's flip that. And then I did change the color, but initially I made it white. So let's do that. And then I'll show you that again. And then I just wanted to put this in the center just because it was kind of empty down here. That would give it a little more interest. But I did think the white was too bright. So then I went back to that color we used for the border.
Cheryl says, I always wonder what those say.
Well, I actually like writing that you can't really read. That, like, I think this one is French. A lot of
You would
times,
love doctors in that case, I guess.
yeah, I know that you can't read. Um, but yeah, I kind of just like it for the visual appeal more than what does it really say. Although I have I found at a yard sale a few years ago a bunch of old postcards and letters, and they were in English. And I did scan some of those, like the writing sections. Some people tried to write like a book on a, a little tiny postcard, and then used those and created my own brushes out of them. So that's another way
That's
of doing
amazing.
that.
I guess it's
And
probably good that you can't determine what it says because people use these for, like posters for a movie or something really gritty, and then it's
exactly.
probably like a recipe for sourdough bread or something.
I know. It's true. So I did decide after I had originally done this and did the border second, I did come back to the writing and lower that opacity even a little bit more. Just I wanted it to be very subtle there. And then I went back to the apothecary texture, added a layer mask, and I wanted to take some of the texture off of the wagon wheel itself so that you could see it a little bit more. I can make that smaller. And this is where I do usually lower my brush a little bit so I can gradually take off some of that texture, because that's the part I want the viewer to focus on. So you can just go over it that way and you'll see that's the area that's now gotten a little bit brighter. So we've subdued the rest of it, but still given some interest to it with the writing and the border. I thought the border added a nice touch on this one. There you have it. All right.
Amazing. Again, I love how different each one of these compositions is.
Thank you. Yeah, I tried to pick a variety of subjects. I do have, some old barns and buildings because that's what I'm just enjoying photographing all of them down here since we've been in Tennessee. There's just so many cool old buildings.
It
And
seems
this
like an
next,
incredible place.
oh, it's amazing. And this one, oh, I opened the finished one. We don't want to do that. Well, you got a
Here's one I
preview.
made
So,
earlier. Yeah.
yeah, so that's where we're starting. And this house has since been torn down. So I'm glad I got this photo. So this one I actually started. I did do a couple of adjustments. I was just going to show you. I used my healing brush to just get rid of this power line, the sign here, and kind of get rid of that bright spot on there. So I just duplicate my layer and do that on there. So just a little quick tip on that. So let me get my textures going here. So first we're going to bring in another one of the apothecary ones. And this one I also ended up flipping the direction because it had more of the scratches on the left side, and I wanted that on the other side away from the house. So we're going to flip this one horizontally. And then we're going to change this one to soft light. And bring down. Actually, I changed my mind, and then I went with hard light. In my notes, I even say change it afterwards. And I'm going to make my opacity about 40%. So sometimes I'll apply it at one, way, or one blending mode or opacity, but you can always go back and change your mind. And that's what's great about working with layers. So next we're going to bring in, this is called Dingy and Dirty. And I'm going to rotate this one clockwise. So I'm going to actually hold my shift key. And when you hold the shift key and you rotate something, it moves it in 15-degree increments. So it makes it end up nice and straight. And I just put my cursor outside the corner. You can see that little curved arrow, and then you can drag it around. It's just a quick way of doing that. And then this one, I'm going to go with the multiply blending mode because that'll get rid of all the white and just leave our darker areas. And then brought back the opacity. And then I'm going to do one more border here.
Nisreen says blending modes really help enhance the effects of the textures. They really do.
Definitely. Yeah, that really is the whole key of working with textures is how you blend them. And sometimes a blending mode will work great, on a particular image and texture, and you could use the same blending mode and texture on something else and it won't have the same effect. So a lot of it depends on the colors of your original image as well as, the texture itself. So that's why it really is a trial and error process. People always say, well, how do you know what texture to use? You have to try some, and you will get a feel, like I said, with like colors and things. The more you do it, it does kind of give you a clue of where to start anyway.
Yeah, you
At least
develop an
most of the time.
intuition.
Not always. So this one, I'm also going to change the white. I'm going to take this white part out, just clicking with my magic wand on the white and hit my delete key. Control D to deselect. And I'm going to just lower this a little bit. So I decided to do it this way instead of changing the blending mode. And then I did change the color after the fact. After I got it to this point, I selected a blue. Well, and you can select colors from your image, which I often do. So once you have the color picker open, if you move your cursor over your image, you get that little like bullseye. So you can select a color just by clicking in your image. You'll see the color changing. And that's how I came up with this original color. But of course, I wrote it down so I could replicate it. And I just went with a really light blue. And then our backspace. And then lower the opacity a little bit more to make it blend in. So it just gives it that little extra,
That's
grunge
so
kind of
beautiful
look.
light.
Thank you.
Yeah, honestly, that's the colors of that sky and the light details of that border
Hmm.
are actually beautiful because I've seen a lot of work like that, but there's something special about that.
Well, thank you. And if you wanted more of this kind of effect up at the top where here it doesn't have as much, again, you could just take that layer, edit, transform, rotate it 180 degrees, and then you've got more of that in your sky where it will really show up and enhance that. And then less down here on the grass, which is less important. So I actually like that
Amazing.
even better.
Danielle was asking, can you flip the textures vertically? And yes, you definitely can,
Yes.
as
Yep. You
Hazel
can flip
just
them. You
demonstrated.
can rotate them or flip them. And if you're just trying to flip the one layer, you want to go into the edit transform. If you'd use the other commands that you normally would change an image with, it will flip all of the layers. So here I'm only wanting to do the one layer. So if you go to edit transform, then that's where you can do your flips, or you can just do the rotate, either 90 or 180 degrees, or grab the outside corner if you're on your move tool. So you get that, corner, curved corner, and then rotate it that way. So there's several ways you can do it, but you want to make sure you're only changing that layer and not the whole image, or we'd have an upside down house. Okay, just checking we're doing pretty good on time. So let me close this one.
I can see several community members as well asking where to find the borders and the script text and so on. It's all in the green button just below this live stream,
Yes.
which is
Yeah,
a
everything I'm
special bundle
using.
Hazel put together with us.
Yes, I selected these 3 products because I thought they would all work well together to really give it this vintage look, and, I definitely like these sets, and there's lots of great borders. You're gonna see a couple more, and I'm gonna use another one in this project that's very different. So I'm gonna start by bringing in a couple of textures, and these are from the Paper Designer collection that's part of this mini bundle. You can see there's even a little bit of writing in this one. And we're going to change this to multiply. Whoops, up here. And then bring back our opacity. How about there? I'm going to bring in another old paper. I love textures that also have like built-in borders. It's like gives you that extra step already completed. We're going to change this one to overlay. And we'll bring this back a little bit. So you can see how we've gotten a border from this texture already, a little bit lighter edge to it. And then we're going to bring in one of these overlay ones that has like postcard on it and a couple other different things in this one. And we're going to change this one to color burn, which is going to darken it and then bring back the opacity. And then the only thing I wanted to change here is I didn't really like this like little, registration mark or bullseye there. So you can either erase it, or the preferred way is to use your layer mask. So that way, if you change your mind, you can always reverse it. I'm going to make this smaller, make my opacity 100%, and just brush right over that area. And then I'm going to go back to this layer. And I like the way these textures look. I thought the browns were a little too warm. So I decided to add a hue and saturation layer, and I wanted to only affect this texture, not the whole image. So once I add my adjustment layer, before I make any changes, I want to clip this adjustment to this layer. And if you hold down your Alt key or Option on a Mac and put your cursor between those 2 layers, when you see that little icon, you can click, and now you see how it moved over, and this little arrow is saying this layer is clipped to this layer. So any changes I do are only going to affect that texture and not my whole image. So in this one, I decided to bring the saturation down of that texture. So I'm getting the texture without all of the color. And then I'm going to go back to the second layer and do the same thing. I'm going to add a hue and saturation. I'm going to clip it to that layer. And this one I brought back the saturation to about 12. So I've gotten you can see especially on this one, how much brighter that is, more brown. So it's made it a little more subdued, but yet I'm still getting the texture without all of the color. So you can always modify your textures even with different adjustment layers. And in the next project, I'm going to even turn one black and white. So because I just want the texture and not any of the color. So that's another way you can do it. Any questions on that? Do we have any pending?
I think everyone is still following along really clearly. Like, honestly, your
Awesome.
teaching style is just incredibly clear.
Thank you.
Do let us know in the live chat though. Is everything at a good pace for everyone? Everyone understanding all these steps?
Perfect. All right. So we're going to close that one. And I love this image. This is one of my favorites I did last spring on one of my Barnes workshops here. And I just loved the fence line. It was very foggy that morning, so it just made it very soft, and I really love this image. But we're going to go a different direction and grunge it up a little bit. So with this one, I'm going to bring in one of the apothecary textures, another one with a little bit of writing in it. And this is one I want to remove the color, but so I just basically am getting the texture and the writing without the brown tones. So I'm going to add a black and white adjustment layer and clip it to that layer because I don't want my image to become black and white. I just want my texture black and white. And then I'm going to adjust some of the colors to adjust the tones in here. So I'm going to brighten up my yellow quite a bit. And I'm going to go about there. And then the reds, I'm going to bring up some. And then we're going to change our blending mode to hard light and bring the opacity back. Oops, I take that back. I did this when I was testing earlier. This layer should stay at normal. It's the texture I need to go back and change to hard light. There we go.
I think it's always
You have to
reassuring to
remember to
see
do that.
these things happen live. It's like it happens for
Yeah,
everyone.
it's like,
Don't worry.
you're used to working on the same layer that you're on when you bring in a texture, and it's like, oh yeah, I was on an adjustment layer, so now I have to go back to the texture and actually change that. So yes, sometimes I do that too. It's
It,
all a process.
I love this from Sheila in the chat saying Hazel has just inspired me to go out and shoot all of the old barns and cabins in my area and
There
spice
you
them
go.
up with textures. Love that.
Absolutely.
It's what these sessions are
Absolutely.
all about, right? We're trying to
For
inspire
sure.
creativity, get people out
Yeah.
there creating more.
That's what I tell people all the time. It's all about it's not so much exactly what I'm doing on this project, but it's giving you the idea of the types of things you can do, whether it's these textures or, textures you create or anything. I mean, Design Cuts has thousands of textures you can find.
It's
And this,
true.
like I said, I selected these because I particularly liked them, but there's just tons of different things you can get. And using them on your images just to give it that whole look and make it uniquely your own. I love to use the example too of like going somewhere to an iconic spot, in the US, it may be, the Grand Canyon or, anywhere that you've seen lots and lots of pictures of. By using textures and overlays, you can take that iconic shot and make it one that nobody else is going to have but you because
Yeah,
you
instead of like the
added
same
stuff.
unsplash photo kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, the ones that,
It's unique.
you see thousands of photos of certain spots. And so this is the other thing that will happen if you're not paying attention, like I just did. So I just dragged in my other texture, except because I was on this layer, when you add a layer, it's always above your active layer. So it ended up below my adjustment. So the easy fix, we can just drag this up, but then I'll have to reconnect this adjustment to that layer. So we'll just go back in, and that's why it's nice that this kind of jumps to the right and shows you that arrow so you know that it's clipped to that layer. So that's another thing to kind of pay attention to, is you're always going to add a new layer above your active layer. And this one, I'm also going to adjust as a black and white because I don't really want this bright yellow color. So we're going to add another black and white adjustment layer, and we're going to clip that. And I'm going to make a few changes I'm going to actually bring down the yellow a little bit this time, and the red a little bit brighter. So when you're working with brown tones, you're generally going to be adjusting your reds and yellows if you go to a black and white. Obviously, if you're working with like a green or a blue texture, then you may have to, do the other sliders. So now we're going to change this layer to multiply, and then bring back our opacity to about there. And then I did brush a little bit of this one off of the center of the image so we can add a layer mask. And grab our brush. We're on the round brush. And I'm going to bring my opacity of my brush somewhere around 50. It doesn't have to be exact. I'll usually just click somewhere in the middle. And that will take the texture off more gradually because you may not want to remove all of it. So you can see I'm just brightening that sky back up a little, maybe the building, and then just highlight the fence. So we're using the texture to more darken the edges rather than our sky area. So you can kind of see where I've brushed there. Maybe take the rest off the little shed here. And then I'm going to bring in another one of these edges, and I'm going to rotate this. And I'll stretch that out. And I'm going to change this one to multiply and then lower my opacity about 50%. And then I came back to this original apothecary one and changed my opacity and brought it back just a little bit more. And there you have it. So we went from that to that. And there's just so many ways you can modify all these things.
It's stunning.
It's so
And
much fun.
everyone's saying it looks like a drawing now. It looks like something out of a book to me.
Yeah, like a sketchbook, especially because of the writing. It looks like old ink around the edge, some ink blots, and that's a good analogy. Thank you. I like that.
I know I keep saying this, but I genuinely think this one's my favorite now.
Your favorite keeps changing.
They just keep getting better, genuinely.
Oh, thank you. I love this image. I actually have it as my screensaver on my iPad because I just really like, not with the texture, it's just the original image, but I really liked it.
It's amazing. I love how that fence line is disappearing.
Yeah, that was just made it for me. And I wish that gate wasn't there, but I could really clone it if I wanted to take the time. But it kind of, it is what it was, the side gate. And yeah, I just love this old little shed with the vines growing on it. And yeah,
Yeah, stunning.
it's not as pretty when it's not foggy because then there's more distractions in the background. But as a foggy day shot, it worked out really well. And speaking of foggy days, we're going to do another foggy image.
I love how many you're sharing this
Oh,
session.
thank you. And this is the last one I have. This one was kind of my extra one if we had time. So since we have time, I actually don't have all of the texture separated, but I have a before and an after for you. So this is, again, it was a foggy morning. There's an old house over here to this side that we were photographing. It was one of my workshop mornings. And there is a house back here, but you really can't see it. So that didn't bother me. But I love the old tire swing on this tree and just it's softened it up with all the fog behind it. So I'm going to open up my finished one and I'll walk you through the layers. It's still using all these same set of textures. We have 3 textures on here. So let's we started with that. And this is the Apothecary 24, which I've used on one of the other projects. And I just love the colors in this one. And this one I took to multiply, brought it way down to 24%. And then another apothecary texture. And this one started bringing in some of the grunge to the border. And it's a light color, which is why I like the center, but I definitely liked the border in that one. And then I brought in one of the paper ones that had the black color. Let's just take this one. This is soft light. Let's take it to normal. And you can see when I brought it in, it's that darker black background. So we changed that one. Where did I just say it was soft light, I think? Yeah. And I left it at 100%, and then I just masked some of it off of the center. So if we didn't have the mask here, you can see it had a lot more of the grunge in the middle, and I wanted to emphasize that tree. So I just masked that off of the center. So it just really toned down those edges and gave us some grunge and visual um, interest to focus you on that tree. I don't know why I
Amazing.
love
And
shooting old trees, especially when they're bare like that. There's a few.
we have a tree nearby us, which
Mhm.
it looks not dissimilar, and I always call it the brain tree
There
because
you
it
go.
it looks like all these kind of little
Yeah, I
connections
never
shooting
thought
off
of
of
that.
it.
That's a good name. I never thought of that when I looked at a tree, but this one was just starting to get a few, I think, leaves just starting because this was early spring.
Yeah, so
But
stunning.
thank you.
Thank you so much, Hazel. First and foremost, can everyone who's live with us right now give it up for Hazel on the chat? Because what an incredible session. I
Thank you.
massively enjoyed that. I told you at the start how much I love this type of work. Cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for
Hazel,
having me.
thank you again for joining me. That was absolutely fantastic. I look forward to catching up soon. Thank you again.
Thank you. All
All
right, we'll
right.
talk to you soon, Tom. Thanks.
Bye bye.